Hello, this is Justin Williams with the Wolfpacker Podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by editor of the Wolfpacker.com and fellow co-host Matt Carter. And today we're going to talk about conference realignment in college athletics and how that relates to NC State. So I'm sure everyone that listens to this podcast, avid college sports fan, has heard the news about UCLA and USC moving to the Big Ten, the latest jump in college or conference realignment talk, at least in 2022 here. That's on the heels of Oklahoma and Texas announcing before last football season that they were going to jump to the SEC. And it's all started a new whirlwind of conversations about what does this mean for the future of college sports. We will get into that. I'm sure a lot of what you've consumed already relates to the big picture of college sports as a whole. We're going to try to take a more narrow approach and see specifically how it relates to NC State, what this all means for NC State, and of course we can then kind of take the conversation to what this means for the ACC as a whole. But before we jump into that conversation, just some quick reminders for the folks listening and watching at home. Please subscribe, download this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, everywhere you listen to podcasts. Plus, you can watch us on our YouTube channel, so please head over to our YouTube channel, the Wolfpacker YouTube channel, and subscribe. Give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment while you're at it. Also, head over to the Wolfpacker.com, part of the On3 network now, and take advantage of the special deal. For just $1, you can get a year's worth of premium subscription to the On3 network, which of course includes all of the great work going on at the Wolfpacker.com. So as we get closer and closer to football season, obviously more incentive to go to the website and see what's going on with the Wolfpack heading into fall in 2022. But right now is still an important time if you're an NC State fan, if you're an NC State football fan specifically, because pretty much every day I'm seeing big recruiting updates happening at the Wolfpacker.com, and that is really the bread and butter of where you can really take advantage of the special deal, and your subscription for just $1 gets you a year's worth of subscription, and then from there you're hooked, you're on it, you love it. So anyways, all right, Matt, let's start talking about conference realignment. I kind of started the podcast with the most recent news, USC, UCLA to the Big Ten. That seems to have brought conference realignment back into the national conversation, at least everybody that covers college sports in some degree. Part of that is seasonality. We're in the dog days of summer in the sports calendar, so people have to find some things to talk about. But it also has kicked off this big worry as, at the end of the month, all the college beat writers are going to be heading to these conference media days. You're going to be going to ACC kickoff here in a couple weeks. So good time to be talking about, what does this mean for the future of college sports? It seems like whenever anything like this happens, whenever a school announces they're going to switch to a new conference, it's all of a sudden doomsday again, and the clock restarts, and all right, everybody make your move, and everything's going to be decided in the next week here. Nothing as of yet. I mean, I don't have the specific day in front of me, but I think it's been about a week since USC and UCLA announced this move. Am I right, Matt?
A little over. It was a week last Thursday. It's about a week and a half.
Okay, so no other schools since have announced that they are switching conferences, at least in the Power 5 that I'm aware of.
I'm just kidding.
Breaking news. If there's breaking news during this podcast, we might have to just restart this whole thing over again. But where I'm going with this is, there seems to be this hyperbole effect whenever these types of things happen, and obviously the biggest question NC State fans have right now is, where does this leave NC State? What's the future of the ACC? It seems like it's becoming a two-dog race between the SEC and the Big Ten, so does that mean the other Power 5 conferences go away? Are the remaining three, including the Pac-12 and the Big 12, competing to be number 3 behind the SEC and Big Ten, and everybody else is just going to go away? And, if that happens, where's NC State in all this? Because you start to go down the list of ACC schools that might be of interest to the SEC and the Big Ten. And while certainly NC State is on the list, it's not at the top of the list. It's not at the bottom of the list, but it's not at the top of the list. It's somewhere right in between. So, Matt, I guess the first question, and I've talked about this long enough, and hopefully this can kind of just jump into a free flowing conversation here. But uh, as an NC State fan, what should you make of all this? How should you be feeling here, sitting in the summer of 2022, about the future of where NC State could be playing in football and men's basketball at the very least?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I would say you feel uneasy. I can't lie and sugarcoat it, and that's not necessarily anything NC State has done. It's just the reality of the ACC position. But I do kind of like what you said, where this has consumed a lot of my daytime over the last week and a half. I've written two columns, not columns; they were more updates of the situation, kind of to survey the landscape. And there's been a lot of speculation. Right in the immediate aftermath, everybody thought this avalanche was about to come down the mountain. Don't assume the Big Ten is done, or the SEC is going to try to make a move now. And there's a reality that probably was never the case. We even had a report today. The SEC kind of fined 16 teams, and they don't want to be the culprit of any further expansion. So I would suggest in the immediate future, everything's probably going to proceed as has been proceeding over the last X amount of years for the ACC. But I think there is a small window for the ACC to try to get something done, to change and reverse course or change its trajectory for what may be more like an impending doom, if you will. And we got about 5 years to try to figure it out. The revenue gap is real. It's only going to get wider. You're not going to erase the revenue gap, but you can make the discrepancy as minimal as possible. But how do you do that? You're stuck in a contract with ESPN that is now below market value for the next, for the next 14 years. 14 years. Now, SEC just re-upped, just did a huge contract with the SEC. The Big Ten is on its way to a historic payday that will more than probably quadruple what the ACC has on an annual basis from a TV deal. So, you got about 5 years to figure. So why do I say you got about 5 years? Because the SEC just redid its deal, as I just explained. They got their next deal coming up before the ACC did to renegotiate its deal. Now, it comes at a point where you have a point of diminishing return, which is why I think the SEC is not really in a hurry to do anything. They have 16 mouths at the table now that they have to feed. And when you start feeding people over and over these big, fat meals, they get used to it. And they develop the appetite for it. And they're not interested in going on a diet and sharing their meal with somebody else. So if somebody else is coming to the table, they better bring a cook with them, right? And it's got to be a cook that can make a lot, so that they're not only feeding the person coming to the table, but they're giving the others a little bit more food too. And at the amount of money that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to make, it just isn't a school out there that's going to do that for those two conferences. There's not a package out there, and short of Notre Dame being included, that's going to change the TV deal enough for them to say it's worth bringing these two teams in, and we can make an extra $3-4 million a year on that TV contract. So that's why the ACC has a little bit of time. But when the SEC TV deal comes up in 2034, it's a brand new game. Now they're going to be interested in saying, hey, whatever brand is, well, let's live in a hypothetical world where NC State has won the 2020 2 national championships.
That would put NC State in a pretty good place, by the way. I would say if NC State goes on to win a national championship in football in the next 15 years, then if you're NC State, you don't have to worry too much about the ACC.
But let's live in a hypothetical world that the PAC does it in the CFP, the College Football Playoff. That sparks a whole new era of NC State football. They go on to win 5 ACC championships in the next 10 to 15 years, make a couple appearances in the New Year's Six or College Football Playoff. So they're now a brand team, and the SEC about to reopen in the next TV contract, and they'll go to NC State and say, hey, interested in joining? Now that grant of rights, which is the big term that everybody's been using, by the time that could potentially come, it's down to 2 or 3 years, and it can become a drop in the bucket based on what the SEC will make in that television contract. They will quickly be able to make it up and swallow the bill and pay it off. And voila, you got the ACC is rated, because the SEC would probably seek to take, I don't know how many teams they would seek to take. So
I heard a good way to look at, or I read a good way to look at it. I forget where I read this. It was something I was reading this morning, but it's no longer about increasing the pizza pie, the whole pie. It's not about increasing the whole pie. It's about increasing the slices of the pie. So if the SEC is standing now at 16 teams, if they want to go out and acquire a 17th and an 18th team to join their conference, they're looking for 1 or 2 schools that are going to bring so much value to the SEC that even with the addition of 2 more teams, that the per team distribution based on whatever new media deal that they can go out and get with these 2 new schools, these 2 new brands, really, should I say, is going to be enough so that everybody's per team revenue goes up. So that's not easy to do when you're already dealing with 16 teams and there's only but so many of these big fish out there remaining. I mean, Oklahoma and Texas, those are certainly big fish. Those are 2 brands that you add to your product. Everybody else is getting richer because of that. Because I mean, is there a bigger brand in college football than Texas, at least from like a financial standpoint? I mean, it's definitely a top 5. Yeah, I mean, the only one I can think of that is independent right now is Notre Dame.
Mm.
And that seems to be what I think will be the linchpin. If Notre Dame decides, first of all, if Notre Dame decides they want to join the ACC, well, then the ACC all of a sudden is safe and is a firm number 3 in this arms race with the SEC and Big Ten. If Notre Dame decides it wants to go to the Big Ten, which one could argue would be a better fit, at least, well, I mean, geography doesn't matter anymore, but in terms of just traditional rivalries and the coast-to-coast element of what Notre Dame likes about being an independent school, throw out the legality of whether or not they could do that with their current agreements with the ACC, because right now, if Notre Dame's going to join a football conference, it has to be the ACC unless a team of lawyers can prove otherwise, which is kind of the main stipulation in all this. Well, if Notre Dame ends up joining the Big Ten, then I think that would be the linchpin that starts it all, and then everything gets blown up. But I don't think that's happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I say Notre Dame is the biggest prize. Just because we're talking about, somebody on the message board asked some related question to this. I don't think people realize that about 80%, somewhere between 70 to 80% of the current TV deal is estimated for football. It just shows you how far ahead football has eclipsed all other sports in college in particular. And I noted, I'm doing a story about NC State TV ratings, which you can read on our site. I don't know if Justin had a chance to read this story, but we'll see if he's surprised by this nugget. The NC State, North Carolina, Friday night after Thanksgiving football game, with Justin H. Williams was in attendance. I can't confirm how many Old Toughies he drank during the game, but judging by catching up with him at halftime, he had at least a couple by that point. Actually had more viewers than the first UNC Duke basketball game in Chapel Hill. Think about that.
Well, here's another one to throw out.
Mhm.
You know what gets comparable ratings to the Duke Carolina basketball game, which is the highest rated basketball game in men's college basketball? The Pinstripe Bowl. I mean, a middle tier ACC team and a middle tier Big Ten team meeting in Yankee Stadium to play around New Year's Eve gets as many eyeballs as Duke Carolina. Now, ratings aren't everything when it comes to television contracts, but it does mean a lot. I mean, that's your metric.
Well, and that explains why Notre Dame is so high. I mean, so somebody would say, why Notre Dame and not North Carolina, for instance? Because when Notre Dame is on TV, you're guaranteed at least probably 3 million viewers, which is 3 million at the watermark in college basketball. If you have a 3 million viewer game, I think there was 2 or 3 of them this past year in college basketball. With Notre Dame, you're guaranteed to get that. And in a marquee game, you're probably going to push upwards to 10 million viewers if it involves Notre Dame. It's a national audience. And because of how much more valued college football is over any other sport, that's why Notre Dame is the top prize in all of this. And so that's why if you're NC State, to kind of bring it back to the past, you have to pay attention to Notre Dame. If they join the Big Ten, where the Big Ten's not going to be interested in an odd number of football teams. It logistically doesn't make sense. You want an even number. So who they're going to pack us with? Knowing that probably would be the death knell for the ACC, their last chance of bringing in a high-profile brand school. All that ACC schools aren't going to stick around and say, if we can figure this out. They're going to say at this point, it's over. We're never going to be Big Ten SEC. And if we want that kind of money, if we want to compete at that level, we just got to join them. So they're going to start, the lawyers are going to be tripping over themselves to challenge the grant of rights and team up with Notre Dame. And then at that point, it becomes a bit of a mad scramble. And that sets in the inevitable motion of what the ACC is destined to do. I don't think Notre Dame's going to join the Big Ten, though, in the immediate future. Now, they do have a lighter grant of rights still. Justin, you mentioned if they have to join the football team conference, it would have to be the ACC unless they withdraw all their other sports from the ACC. And to do that, they would have to pay the grant of rights on those sports. But I just got over explaining to you how the media contract for the ACC is about 75% football and 25% everything else. So their grant of rights is significantly less than the other 14 teams in the ACC because their football is not included in the grant of rights. And so if they were to join the Big Ten, they could pay that very quickly.
That Big Ten might cover it for them.
Yeah. And then you have to wonder who would...
Or should I say, should we stop using conference names and should we just refer to the Big Ten as Fox and the SEC as Walt Disney, a.k.a. ESPN?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what this all is. It's become an arms race of television contracts. But before we started this podcast, I was talking to Matt. It's like, it's frustrating as a college sports fan because, growing up in North Carolina and the rivalry between NC State and North Carolina and Duke and Wake Forest. I mean, yes, UNC is a national brand and so is Duke in basketball, but our experiences are based on the regional and almost the cultural aspect of consuming athletics and going to games at Carter Finley Stadium and Kenan Stadium and PNC Arena, et cetera, et cetera. It's like that was the reason. That's my motive for college sports, and it's almost being hijacked by these national media conglomerates that are just using this as a product to figure out how to enrich themselves as much as possible. So it is kind of it just leaves a yucky feeling in your stomach, to me at least, because 10, 15 years from now, let's say the ACC implodes and the SEC and the Big Ten ramsack what's left of the ACC and they pick their schools, and maybe NC State is one of those schools that gets picked up by the Big Ten or the SEC. Do I really want to see a future where NC State's competing in a 24-team league against, let's say, the Big Ten, and they're competing against Purdue and Northwestern or the SEC, and they're competing against Arkansas and Ole Miss?
I would say this for the SEC, at least I'll give the SEC credit. And I do kind of want to bring about the NC State here in a second, but at least they have kept it as regional. Oklahoma and Texas kind of fit in their footprint. They haven't yet. I don't know what the Big Ten thinking with. I get adding Southern Cal and UCLA from a money standpoint, but it makes no sense anywhere else.
I can tell you exactly what they're thinking. They're thinking about the Los Angeles television market. They're thinking about the state of California. For
the money aspect of it, it maximizes their TV deal to the maximum level.
And where is Fox headquarters, by the way?
Los Angeles. But otherwise, tell me, has Maryland worked out real well for the Big Ten? Has it worked out real well for Maryland?
No.
Has Rutgers worked out real well for the Big Ten?
No.
Has it worked out well for Rutgers?
No.
Has Nebraska worked out real well for the Big Ten? Has it worked out well for Nebraska?
I mean, it's worked out okay for the Big Ten, but it certainly hasn't worked out well for Nebraska.
All these teams, at some point, I've just named the last three teams that have expanded into the Big Ten, and now they're starting to look more and more like dead weight for the Big Ten. And then, who's to guarantee that UCLA and Southern Cal, particularly UCLA, which hasn't had a good football team in forever, took it out on NC State in the bowl game? I was just kidding about that. Just kidding. Obviously, they had a COVID episode. Did not handle it well, though, I might add. Who to say that they can – that they're going to produce some football, or could they become that way? I mean, if I'm a parent living near Los Angeles or living in Sacramento, my son has a chance to go to Stanford or USC. I'm Stanford. I say, hey, look, we'll play Cal. The other Pac-12 sites are kind of a far drive, but they can be in a drive. If you're going to USC, you're going to have to make a long drive to a bunch of home games, and that's it, because you're not going to be able to see in person at least 5 or 6 games a year. It becomes. I think the Big Ten might have overextended itself a little bit, but for NC State, you would much rather be in the SEC because you get South Carolina's right there, Georgia there. That'll be a fun little drive, and Florida. Tennessee as a little border rivalry, that would be kind of fun, and you would assume Clemson's coming along, so it kind of keeps the textile bowl. So I would think there would still be a lot of fun with the SEC. Obviously,
until a successful football season becomes 6-6.
That would be the other dynamic of it. You would have to prove that.
That would be a great football season for NC State in the SEC. Would be 6-6.
Right now, yeah.
But maybe in the theoretical world where NC State wins the college football playoff in 2022, and then they win the ACC 5 times in a row, become the new Clemson, then the good season would be 9-3. What? When then you got to go play Texas, and you got to go play LSU, and then you got to go play Alabama. It's like, maybe you're in a pod with just Clemson and South Carolina. All this talk, I hate it because it's like NC State is in the ACC. It's everything I know, and I don't want to hear anything different, because to me it wouldn't even feel like your own conference if North Carolina wasn't in it.
Well, and that's something to watch too. I mean, they had the political dynamic, and one of the things that I think has totally been off base is an assumption that North Carolina and Duke would automatically partner up. I think Duke is in a world of trouble.
Yeah, Duke doesn't bring any value to the Big Ten or the SEC unless it gets them UNC.
And even then, how much more value are they at? Because you're talking about adding 2 schools. I thought I can't remember his name, but somebody talked to the president of Fox Sports, old president of Fox Sports, I should say. They were talking about the value. He said, Oregon and Washington, if they went to the Big Ten, would have collectively added about $16 million annually to the Big Ten television deal. And it needed to be double that for break even for the Big Ten. So just think about that. And what makes people assume that Duke can add enough value to whatever UNC, which does have significant value. I know people at NC State podcast listeners probably don't want to hear that, but it's the truth. But you know who got more viewers last season in college football than Duke? Akron. Akron was one spot higher on the list of total viewers last year than Duke football. The lowest rated ACC, the least viewed ACC football game last year, if I'm remembering it correctly, on an ESPN network, not ACC network, was Duke UNC. 300,000 people watched the game.
Well, it's certainly not a football rivalry. I mean, it's all for.
That goes by the same. The SEC would want. I'm confident the SEC would want nothing to do with Duke because they don't want the image of Wallace Wade Stadium. That would be forbidden in the SEC. Be blunt about it.
You could never use the term "it just means more" again.
Yeah,
it would eliminate it.
The Big Ten, that'd be a dice. There might be an opening in the Big Ten, but again, Duke's national basketball brand. How much of it is Duke, and how much of it is a guy named Mike Krzyzewski who just retired? I'm just saying.
It's true, but even if you're the top basketball brand, what is that good for? Nobody's talking about the Big Ten or SEC adding Gonzaga.
Yeah, my point exactly. So I kind of wonder. So I mean, if we're getting to NC State, I mean, is there a way of which the politics of the state? Holden Thorpe did an interview with Joe Giglio and Joe Obius, and I finally said out loud what. Actually, the day at UCLA, USC, or maybe the day after UCLA, USC broke the news that they were leaving, I had somebody reach out to me who's not affiliated with NC State, but knows the ACC well, and said that they heard that anybody that wanted UNC was going to have to take NC State. And it's just the board of, and then Holden Thorpe kind of said out loud that, the board of governors of the UNC system would make UNC's life miserable if one school got to go off and play big boy athletics and the other school did not. And quite frankly, I don't think the UNC Board of Governors gives a flip about Duke. So, and they control the purse strings, and they control a lot of power. And so, now, look, push comes to shove. If it gets to the actual point where the SEC says, look, it's either one or you're shut out. I mean, that might be a different animal, but that's where can NC State have enough value to the point where if the SEC, personally, I believe that the SEC would be the NC State's only option, could it enhance its brand well enough so that the SEC is like, well, if we add North Carolina and NC State, we get the state of North Carolina and enough appeal elsewhere to add the value, along with, say, Clemson and I would guess Florida State for that, that spot. But a lot of assumptions being made there, and it's a tricky situation.
Well,
That's why
we're having a conversation where you have to make a lot of assumptions.
I'm going to tell you, really, your best hope is that somehow the ACC lands a miracle and figures this out. Miracle number one would be Notre Dame join the conference in every sport. That's probably not going to happen. I'm thinking is that miracle number two is Clemson, NC State, Florida State, Miami hit it out of the park this year. And all of a sudden, you're looking at four potential. Miami beats Texas A&M in that early season game, and NC State handled business like expected, and Clemson looks great in every game except when they play NC State.
But if that happens, what does that do for the conference?
Well, it'll increase your short-term reputation. You have got to increase your value and your brand to the point of where at some point you can tell ESPN, that $250 million contract you're paying us, we're worth triple that. They're probably worth double that right now. Pre-USC and UCLA leaving, it was estimated the Pac-12 were going to get about a $500 million contract. The ACC is worth more than the Pac-12, so so it's probably worth at least twice as much as what it is now. You've got to find a way to enhance your value. Personally, I think winning to the point where it becomes obvious that if you win and you prove you can win despite the money difference, and you can survive, and then you go to ESPN and say, pony the F up. We deserve a huge.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how those contracts. I don't know where the ACC could use its leverage to say, well, we're gonna go agree to a contract with one of your competitors, because I don't think they could do that, and I don't really think I don't think Walt Disney would have any motivation to get out of a great contract for them. A great contract for them.
I kind of laughed at somebody saying that the ESPN was trying to avoid the ACC contract. I was like, you do not realize that that's the best contract they have right now? They're paying a league half of its value and getting all of that content. If they would avoid the content just to have a few teams join the SEC, they don't really add a whole lot of content, and they're not saving a ton of money. So it might be a losing proposition for them. That obviously that made little sense. But no, it would simply be, I don't know, if you couldn't get out of the contract unless, I get why the ACC was talking to the Pac-12, may still be talking to Pac-12. I don't know. Those reports came out and they've kind of been silent.
Mm-hmm.
I think the ACC is trying to do anything to get a look in on the contract, to which ESPN would say, all right, we'll look at this and readjust your market value. You probably still aren't getting full market value, but, could you get somewhere closer to $400 million annually, which comes out to each school getting a decent chunk of change, about a 67% increase, something in that neighborhood. But short of finding a way to reopen your contract, then the only other option is you got to win. You got to win big. You got to win big consistently. And the teams that have the biggest value, like a Clemson right now, or whomever that may be in 10 years, are proving that they don't need that huge SEC payday to win, because they're winning. And if they're patient, they're going to get a similar payday in a couple years. Those are your only options. Hey, find a way to get that contract reopened. You can't really say expansion, because who would you expand? West Virginia, or
No, here's where you would take a page out of the Big Ten's book, and you'd say, well, we're gonna go get Cal and Stanford, or we're gonna go get the Arizona schools. We're gonna have a West Coast pod, and we're gonna turn into a national conference. We're gonna abandon. I mean, the ACC's abandoned geography when they added Pittsburgh and Louisville. I mean, geography doesn't mean anything anymore. So it's completely about free agent brands. and who's willing to join.
Yeah, and it would take something that if you're going to expand, it would have to be what you talked about. It has to be a dramatic expansion.
And hey, it would check my box it would hit this niche market. I would love to see the Wolfpack make an annual trip out to Cal Memorial Stadium and Stanford Stadium, and pay a visit to the Bay Area, play Stanford, play Cal in front of like 25,000 people on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I mean that's the reality. It would take something drastic. Like I said, if you're going to expand, it would have to be what you just talked about. Well, almost like where you say, hey, Pac-12, Big 12, you big boys and no whatever big boys you got left in those conferences, y'all get together and then we partner up and we form a new quote unquote conference, right? And it would still be the ACC team primarily playing just the ACC team. That other conference playing them, and it would be like an old school National League, American League partnership, and you would meet up in a title game of some sort. I mean, I would obviously ESPN would have an interest in that, and then you would get
And just for comedy's sake, could we call this league the Alliance? Could we call the Big 12, Pac-12, ACC? No, it's just it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek rebuttal to the Big Ten, the Mega Alliance, or maybe the Saudi government decides we would like to diversify our athletic business ventures into college football, and there's a live conference, just like in golf.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of common similarities here in terms of just, let's abandon every tradition and everything we love about sports, and let's find a way to shake it up so that maybe we can make as much money as possible. I don't know. If you're an NC State fan, I think you just got to hope that somehow, some way in all of this, that the ACC survives.
Yeah, and that's why I go back to the beginning. I think they got really about I mean, we're in 2022. They got to find out by 2027, 28 is a way to close that revenue gap. And the ACC, look, I think we can wrap it up by saying they just made a series of, I wouldn't call them ill-informed decisions. I would say unfortunate decisions. They were decisions that just have not panned out. They made some sense. There was sound thinking behind some of those decisions. Some, not all. I have to clarify. But the reality is that they have made a series of unfortunate decisions on top of some inherent disadvantages, and not to speak poorly about them, but there are a fair number of private small enrollment schools in the ACC that you do not see in the Big Ten and the SEC. And I think there would be, if they could do some do-overs, there'd be a lot of do-overs, and you can go all the way back to the 80s. I give you one simple move in the 80s that could have dramatically changed the outcome. Penn State was looking for a conference in the 1980s. You bring in Penn State, life is a lot different right now. I suspect Maryland would probably still be in the league. And when you expanded, you could have added Pittsburgh and had the entire state at Pittsburgh. And you would have every state from Pittsburgh to South Carolina, pretty much Pittsburgh and half of South Carolina up, Pennsylvania, I should say, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, huge chunk of South Carolina, tiny little piece of Georgia, and some pieces in Florida. And you got yourself a heck of a conference going, right? But it was just a lot of series of unfortunate decisions that put the ACC in the position it is in. And they got probably about a 5-year window to try to change it, or at that point, schools are going to abandon trying to save the ACC and more so start looking into their 5-year plan to get out of the ACC. So
What
So,
stinks the most is that, you don't agree to this TV deal through 2036. You agree to this deal through 2025, 2026, something reasonable. Not putting a 20-year contract on it. No, unbeknownst what could happen in the next 20 years, what the market could look like, what, the increase in television contracts could look like. Just it would be a
mm-hmm.
great environment for the ACC to go out there, because there are plenty of companies that would love to get into the college football brand and bring more competition to Fox and Walt Disney. I mean, CBS is losing the SEC.
Sure. Yeah.
They would love to have the ACC. Unfortunately, they just can't talk to them until 2036. So
Yeah.
that's the position we're in today. So,
And I'd add, why was that decision made? Well, at the time, it would say we need stability. They were not thinking that this gigantic revenue gap was going to develop. Uh, in And I think that maybe where the biggest mistake, we'll just say his name because everybody knows who we're talking about, John Swofford. Biggest mistake was not fully understanding the media television landscape at commissioner. I don't think he just fully got it between the value of an actual ACC network, um, the increasingly no more value of a Raycom distribution regional network, which gave the ACC a ton of money. At one point, the ACC with the richest contract because of the Raycom and Jefferson Pilot and all of that. But that model had, it had been it had just lost its effectiveness, and I thought Swofford kind of clung to that too long. Didn't fully appreciate the value of having a network. Didn't maybe push hard enough for it. And I understand that there was hard time getting the ESPN to partner up with it, but that should have been priority number one when the Big Ten launched, not after the SEC network. And then also not getting the TV revenues were going to skyrocket because, as you said at the outset, live sports has become perhaps the most valuable property for cable television, right? I mean, that's the fairest way to say
it. Basically any type of television. What else can you not stream later?
Yeah, exactly. So, not understanding, and so look, he chose stability over potential revenue. I go back in time, you can understand why, but it was an unfortunate decision, right? He chose to wait on the ACC network. Look at it, the failure of the Pac-12 network, the failure of the Longhorn network. I understand why you want to be cautious and make sure you have a good partner in ESPN. Looking back, it was unfortunate. Should have been more aggressive in making the decision. The time you look at Raycon worked for us so long. It never failed us. And looking back, unfortunately, yeah, that to this day, they still costing the ACC school money. The deal that Swofford signed with Raycom in his tenure. So, and the details of that are in a premium story on the Wolfpacker.com, actually, if you want to read my last
Veteran
column.
move. A plug for a column written by yours truly, Matt Carter.
So,
Yeah.
I think that's really where the ACC got. They just made a series of unfortunate decisions, and schools like NC State are, like you mentioned, when you go to Brandon, of what schools would be wanted. And that's why to bring it full circle, that's why you're probably a little nervous at the NC State. You do have a window, though, and NC State athletics has never been stronger competitively, with the exception of men's basketball last year. So, keep it up, and your brand will be greatly enhanced at the most opportune time. But the pressure's on.
Makes this
Right
season
now.
pretty important. A lot of weight for these young men to carry. It's like, but the beauty of it is, I guarantee you go around that locker room, they're not thinking the future of the NC State athletics and how it could possibly fit into the Walt Disney SEC is going to matter. It's only dependent on whether or not we beat Boston College this Saturday. Like, no, they're not thinking that. They're just thinking we want to go win every game. We want to have the best season possible, and I want to improve my draft stock as much as possible. So, anyways, well, as long as there's NC State football to watch, we will be watching it. We will be covering it, and I know everybody listening to this podcast will as well. And so, good talk. Hopefully, no big changes here in the future. No need to have a emergency podcast here of any type of conference realignment. Let's maybe get through this football season, and then at least get through the rest of the year before the next chip falls. But we'll keep monitoring it, and as we get closer to football season, of course, we'll get back to talking what we like to talk, which is on-field action and previewing what is to come on the field and on the court versus what's happening behind closed doors as it relates to TV contracts. But anyway, some quick reminders before we log off here. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us: Apple, Spotify, Google Play. You can also watch us on YouTube. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Wolfpacker YouTube channel. Give this video a thumbs up. Drop a comment while you're at it. Comment ideas. How about this? Comment idea. NC State fans, would you rather be in the Big Ten or the SEC, and why? Why Big Ten or SEC? Just theoretical, of course. We're all hoping that the ACC stays alive and NC State, continues to be an ACC member as long as it's alive. So hopefully it's a moot point. But would be interested to hear what the fan base would kind of rather lean towards in terms of these mega conferences forming. And lastly, head over to the Wolfpacker.com, part of the On3 network. Special deal going on right now. For just $1, you get a year's worth of premium subscription to the On3 network, which includes all of the great work at the Wolfpacker.com. So go take advantage of that deal. Football season is just right around the corner, so you might as well go ahead and get yourself prepared to be the smartest fan at your tailgate. Follow us on social media. You can follow our main account at the Wolfpacker on Twitter. You can give me a follow personally at Justin H. Will on Twitter, and give us a like on Facebook, NC State Wolfpack on the Wolfpacker.com. So for Matt Carter, this is Justin Williams, and this has been the Wolfpacker Podcast.